So today we are going to deal with Anne Bradstreet's poem Prologue, as I mentioned to you, and I just hope that you have already read the poem in advance so as to gain a better understanding of the poem while we do it in this particular lecture. Now, before we go into the poem per se, we have to first delve into the background of Anne Bradstreet a little so as to understand why she wrote what she wrote. Now, this poem, Prologue, becomes extremely important because it is considered to be one of the earliest examples of, feminist writing or women's writings. Now, why that comes into the purview of the study of this particular poem is because of the questions that this particular poem raises. There are various questions that are being raised by Prologue, which sort of try and give you an understanding of what Anne Bradstreet understood of the position and role of women in society. Now, before going into that, let us first understand who she was. Now, Anne Bradstreet was basically an English woman. She was born in England, in Northampton, in England, in 1612 to a Puritan family, a very staunch religious family, a family which followed the scriptures, the Bible, to the T. And she lived up till the age of 60, and she died in 1672 because she contracted tuberculosis in America while she was staying in America. And she was married at a very early age, at the age of 16, to somebody called Simon Bradstreet, and she bore him 8 children after that. Now, 2 years after her marriage to Simon, the entire family shifted from England to America in 1630, and they moved around the area of Massachusetts. Now, Simon Bradstreet was a colonial magistrate. He was a diplomat. He was also a businessman, and he also happened to be the last governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So he was a public figure. So was her father. Anne Bradstreet's father was also a public figure, and incidentally, both of them, her father and her husband, both of them were instrumental in the establishment of the Harvard University. 2 of her sons actually graduated from that university, and a gate has been named after her family. It still stands today. A gate has been named after Anne Bradstreet's family as a dedication to their services to the university. Now, because she belonged to quite a staunch religious family, a family which upheld certain traditions, she was home tutored. Now, she was tutored in various languages. She was tutored in history, in literature. Now, because of her education, she gained a lot of interest in various fields, in various areas, and she wrote about those areas, her observations, her interpretations, and her interest areas ranged from history to politics to medicine to religion, theology, philosophy, astronomy, a lot of things she was interested in. And she began writing down her observations and her experiences and her interpretations of the things which were happening in these areas during her times. And she had a library of her own, which had about 9,000 plus books. Now, that is very commendable, and that is actually rare in terms of a woman at that point of time. A woman having a library full of books, of 9,000 plus books. Unfortunately, many of those books were destroyed in a fire which occurred in her home in 1966, on which she actually wrote a poem, and the poem is called Upon the Burning of Her House, July 10th, 1966. Most of her poems are actually based on experiences, her understanding of the various experiences, her interpretation of the various experiences, and thus she raises questions in her poems. Now, her poems were mostly based on observations of the world around her, focusing mainly on domestic and religious themes. Now, because, as I said earlier, she was a very successful homemaker, she was a very loving mother, she was very, she loved her, husband immensely. Because of her dedication towards her domestic life, many of her poems actually highlight her, thoughts on domestic life and also religion, because she was very, intimate with her religious beliefs. She followed the teachings of Puritan Christianity, and later on in various poems she also highlighted the various questions which were raised in her mind with regard to these traditions. There were certain inconsistencies in what she believed and what she experienced. Okay, so those are the questions which she raises through her poetry. So her poetry becomes an expression of what her thoughts were on various fields, including domesticity and religion. Now, incidentally, she received more acclaim after her death, posthumously. It was only after her death and in the 19th century and in the 20th century that she gained more popularity amongst readers, because that is a point when these movements, these feminist movements were taking shape, and that is the point when people recognized the various feminist strains or feminist themes in her poems. So also religious themes and religious strains in her poems. Now in her poems, religion and domesticity or feminism, questions on feminism, these are all interrelated, interlinked. Religion and culture, society, these are telling a woman to lead a life in a particular way, but gaining knowledge out of her own experiences, she believed that women should be leading life in a not only connecting oneself to religion, but also in a way in which they could create their own identity. Now understand this: women were told that they were not supposed to be writers, they were not supposed to hold public posts, they were not supposed to be in public domain, right? But because her family members were in the public domain, so she also got exposed to the public domain, the public life, and she understood this, that women were also capable of doing the various things that men were. She saw her husband and her father functioning in a particular way, and she believed that because of her education, because of the knowledge that she had, she would be also able to conduct herself in a particular way in the public domain, that she could also do the things that her father or her husband were doing in the public domain, and that is because of the knowledge she had. So she believed that with knowledge, women could do the things that men were designated to do, that men were given to do, right? And women were not supposed to do, they were not given to do those things. So she understood that there is a difference between what she was taught and what she thought, right? So those thoughts came out, they were expressed through her poems, right? And okay, so she had a traditional view of women but stressed on knowledge and intellect. She was a free thinker. Free thinker, she thought that women have the capacity or the capability to be treated at par with men in society. Okay, so she focused on highlighting the fact that women had the capability of matching the skills in fields where men generally excelled. Now, men were given a certain set of duties in society. Now, she understood through her own experiences that given a chance, even women could, fulfill those duties. Even women could excel in those areas. But women were not given that chance or given that opportunity, right? So she understood that. And she understood that religion had a huge role to play in such a restriction. Okay. Now, the purpose of the publication of her first, set of poems, and she did not publish her own poems initially. They were actually published by her brother-in-law. They were, she had written this book of poems, and her brother-in-law carried the manuscript to England, and he got them published in London. Now, the purpose of this publication appears to have been an attempt by a devout Puritan men to show that a godly and educated woman could elevate her position as a wife and mother without necessarily placing herself in competition with men. So basically, they wanted to show that women could excel in their own right without being a competition to men. Right, we don't always have to compete with men. Women don't always have to compete with men to sort of establish their identity. Women could be women poets, men could be men poets. We just therefore use the word poets for everyone nowadays. We say chairperson and not chairman and chairwoman. In fact, the word sir is used very often while referring to women these days. Right? So you have to understand that, you know, Anne Bradstreet understood this, that women basically could be could be elevated to a height in society. They could be given a position in society without posing a threat to the position of men in society. Now, why did men generally restrain or restrict women? Because there was an insecurity or sort of there was a fright that, if women are given equal opportunities, they could raise themselves to the level of men, and then there will be a parity and equality, and then men could not exercise their power over women. Right? So that is something which he questioned. Now see, if you are able to do something and if I am able to do the same thing, why can't we both be treated like even equally? Okay, why do you always have to take up the role of the writer, the doctor, the this, the that, and we always have to, as women, we always have to take up the role of the mother, the wife, the daughter? So she raises that question. She says in the poem, she says that, I can write poems which are equally great as the poems that are written by men. So why can't I be considered to be a poet myself? Why can't women be given the role of writers? This is a very specific question she asks in the poem. Why can't women be considered to be writers? Because during the times during which she was active, it was not thought to be an appropriate role for a woman, writing that is. So women were not supposed to be writers. So that is a question, very specific question, that Anne Bradstreet asks in her poem, or rather poems. Okay, she highlighted the idea of marriage and children being gifts of God. Primary role of a woman in Puritan society is to be a wife and a mother, clothing the family, cooking them meals, keeping the household clean, teaching the ways of Puritanism to children. Now, these were the roles which were, designed for women at that point of time by the Puritan society, by the society which staunchly followed, religion. Now she questions this. She says, okay, fine, women are supposed to do these and women will do these. But what if she is able to do more? What if, after doing all these things, she is able to write? Why can't you acknowledge the fact that women can multitask? That she can look after her children, she can look after her household, she can look after her husband, and then become a writer? But there was a clear, distinction between the role of a woman and the role of a man in society. So she says that this distinction, why should that be there? If a woman can juggle all her responsibilities and also write, then why she should not be given that opportunity? Now she received a lot of criticism for being a writer. She was because it was not accepted to be the role of a woman in those times. Writing was meant for men whose minds are stronger. So men were supposed to have stronger minds, because of which they had the power to become writers, but women with inferior minds were not supposed to be writers. So, writing was left to men and the household was left to the women. She continued her writing, however, and towards the end of her career, towards the end of her life, the poems that she wrote, they become a little, form of protest. She protested against the designated role of women in society. She protested against the repression which was meted out to women. Women were not supposed to, you are not, fit or capable of writing, or you are not fit or capable of becoming a poet or a writer, or or anything other than being a wife or a daughter or a mother. So that she protested against during during the later half of her career as a writer. Now, there are certain themes which are recurrently present in her poems. I'll just go through them quickly. The imagination that she had, it had a little bit of nostalgia in it. She was nostalgic about her life in England. So when she came to America and she started writing poetry, England very often, featured in her poem. So we can say that there was a sense of nostalgia in her poem. It was a huge store for learning. She also highlighted the glory of God initially, and then the glory of God, it was not missing, but it also was, there was an additional questioning, tone that was added to her poems. Right, that glory of God is fine, we understand, I love God, I follow the scriptures, I follow Bible. But what if certain things that have become a tradition in terms of religion, so there were certain questions in terms of religion which were added to her understanding of religion. She followed religion as she was taught, but then as she grew up she understood that whatever she was taught, there are more things to it, that religion has to offer more. It cannot be restricted only to the restriction of women, okay, so, or restriction of various kinds. So she questioned those restrictions because they were a part of society and not religion per se. Okay, so the theme of the glory of God is very, very much recurrent in her poems. The other theme that is very recurrent in her poems is the role of women, the position that women were given in society. So that is another theme that is very much recurrent in her poems. Philosophical contemplations were also part of her poetry. She basically philosophically contemplated on a lot of things in life, of her position in the family, her position in society, the position of women in general, the question of life, what life is, how life should be followed, should we only follow traditions, or should we also start questioning tradition when we think that there are certain problems or issues or crises related to it. So she basically contemplated philosophically on life. There is another theme that is very recurrent in her works, and that is mortality, the sense of death. Now, why this is there is because of the fact that she constantly kept ill. She, suffered from various illnesses throughout her life, and it was only during this last half of her life that she, suffered from tuberculosis. She also faced paralysis, a number of things she suffered from. So, the idea or the very impending sense of death also is a very recurrent theme in her poems. Now, her works were mainly directed towards the members of her family. They were written for the members of her family. They were most of her poems were basically, as I said earlier, were based on her personal experiences, of the things that she personally experienced, or the things that she heard were happening around her in various fields. And so, but her poems were not. She did not intend for her poems to be published. She did not intend for her poems to be published. She wrote them because she directed them towards her family members, and she did not mean them to be published in the public domain. She used a lot of sarcasm in her poetry. That is the method by which she sort of inserted questions in her poems, that she did not directly question, or rather raise a question in her poem. She used sarcasm, something that is heavily used in the poem that we are going to deal with. So she used sarcasm instead of direct questioning in her poems. She brought out the rebellious strain. There was a rebellious strain, especially towards the end of her career as a poet. There was a very rebellious strain in her poem. She questioned why this is like this, why shouldn't we act differently, Why can't we, sort of look at a particular thing in another way? Why do we always have to act according to traditions, where I can clearly see that traditions have certain problems in them? So these are the rebellious strains which are found in her poems. But her poems were always very positive and hopeful. I'll give you an example. Her daughter-in-law, one of her daughters-in-law, and one of her grandchildren, they passed away, and she loved them immensely. And through her poetry, she expressed her desire to meet them in heaven. She said that, yeah, we might be, separated in this world, but in another world we'll meet again. So there is a huge sense of positivity, a hopefulness in her poem, which is recurrently present in her poems. Okay, so, and I'm not going into the details of the works that she has written. I will be giving you a handout where these will be discussed. I'm just giving you an idea what the kind of woman she was. She was a woman who was educated. She was a woman because of her education raised a lot of questions through her poetry. And her poetry, were basically means of her poetry was basically a means of expression of her thoughts regarding her various experiences. So these are the three things you have to remember, right? So now that we've gained a fair understanding, you can never get a fair understanding of any poet for that matter, but now that we have a basic idea of who she was, let us now delve into the poem itself. Okay, so now let us get into the poem itself, and Bradstreet's prologue. So she begins by saying, "To sing of wars, of captains and of kings, of cities founded, commonwealths begun, for my mean pen are to superior things." So what does she say here? She says that for her, as a woman poet, for her to deal with topics or to write poems on wars, on captains and soldiers, of kings, of cities founded, of commonwealths begun, colonization, to write poems on these topics, her pen is inferior because she is a woman. For my mean pen, inferior, mean here means inferior pen, are two superior things. So these are things which are too superior for her inferior pen. Why? Because she is a woman. Now she is using sarcasm here. She is not literally saying this. She is using sarcasm. She is being sarcastic. Right? She is being sarcastic that people, the society or traditions, they consider these topics, say wars, captains, soldiers, kings, cities, commonwealths, colonization, all these are topics which are beyond the capacity of women writers. For my mean pen, they are two superior things. Or how they all, or each their dates have run, let poets and historians set these forth. My obscure lines shall not so dim their worth. So she says, out of sarcasm, that okay, because I'm a woman, I'm not capable enough, or my pen is not capable enough to compose poems on these things. Okay, fine. So let poets and historians, both of which are supposed to be men, right? So let poets and historians write about these things. Okay? Let them write about these things. My obscure lines, my strange lines. Why strange? Because it was strange for women to write. So the lines that a woman wrote are strange. So my strange lines shall not dim their worth. Okay, fine, I'm a woman writer. I'm not going to dim. Dim means lessen, to make less. I'm not going to lessen them, lessen the worth or the value of these things by writing about them. Because I'm a woman, I'm not supposed to be able to write. I'm not supposed to become a poet. I'm not supposed to possess the capability of writing about these superior things. These are topics which are way too superior for me, way they are beyond my capacity to deal with. So I will not talk about them, and I will not lessen their value. I will not bring down their value by writing about them. Let poets and historians, let men poets, male poets and male historians write about these things, right? Now, but when my wandering eyes and envious heart, great Barth's sugared lines, do but read over, fool, I do grudge, the muses did not part twixt him and me that overfluent store. A Bartas can do what a Bartas will, but simple I, according to my skill. So what is she saying in this particular stanza? She refers to the muses. First we have to understand the fact that she refers to the muses. Now who are these muses? Now, according to Greek mythology, there are 9 muses. There are 9 muses. I am going to name them one by one. Just take note of them. Why I am giving you the names first and then explaining who they are? There is a reason behind that. Anyway, just let me give you the names. So the 9 muses are Calliope, who is a muse of epic poetry; Clio, the muse of history; Erato, the muse of lyric poetry; Euterpe, the muse of music; Melpomene, the muse of tragedy; Polyhymnia, the muse of sacred poetry; Terpsichore, the muse of dance and chorus; Thalia, the muse of comedy and idyllic poetry; Urania, the muse of astronomy. Now all the names that I have taken so far are female names. Means all these muses were women. So the Greeks considered muses. Let me first explain who these muses were. Now these muses were basically goddesses who were given the responsibility to influence or inspire the various artists. Artists who would write epic poetry, who would delve in history, who would delve in lyrical poetry, who would delve in music, tragedy, sacred poetry, dance and chorus, idyllic poetry and astronomy. Right, so artists who would delve in all these things, who would deal or involve themselves in all these things, these goddesses had the responsibility of, inspiring these artists. Now, an artist who is aspiring to write epic poetry had to be inspired enough by Calliope, so as to be able to produce, successful piece. So this goddess is supposed to inspire a person who is trying to compose an epic poem. Clio was somebody who was supposed to inspire a person dealing with history. Erato was supposed to inspire somebody dealing with lyrical poetry. So all the 9 muses have the responsibility of inspiring people who were, aspiring to create pieces or involve themselves in these particular fields. Now, you have to understand, all of these are goddesses, means all of these are women of female background. They are all feminine figures. They are all feminine figures, right? So, how can it be possible that when the Greeks considered that goddesses had the responsibility of inspiring people who would delve into these things, how is it possible that women were not given these responsibilities in society, or women were not thought to be appropriate to be able to deal with these aspects in society, right? So she raises this question, how is it that when the Greeks thought that female characters or female figures could actually inspire artists who were men, why couldn't women become, if they have the capacity of inspiring men, why couldn't they indulge themselves or involve themselves in these fields? Why couldn't they indulge in artistry when they were inspiring artistry? So that is a question that she raises in this particular, stanza. She asks, but when my wandering eyes and envious heart, why are her eyes wandering? Because she's a human, just like men. She is able to see the things that men can see. and she is able to interpret those things in the way men can interpret. So she has her eyes wandering, and she has a envious heart. Why is she envious? She's envious because she thinks that, she feels, or rather she sees that while she is able to do the same things as men, she is restricted from doing the things that men are allowed to do. So her heart becomes envious. She becomes envious because she has the wandering eyes like men, but she is restricted from involving herself in those things unlike men. Right? Now, she was highly influenced, Anne Bradstreet was highly influenced by, or her favorite poet per se would be this French poet Dubarthes, or Dubarthes, right? So she says that great Barthes sugared lines do but read over, fool, I do grudge the muses did not part twixt him and me that overfluent store. So she says that her favorite poet and she were given the same, skills. She grudges the fact that she was given the skills of a poet, just like her favorite poet. Her favorite poet was Dubart, Willem Dubart. So she had the same skills, the same capacity or the same capabilities as her favorite poet was a man, but she was not considered to be capable enough to write as well as Dubart, because he could write because he was a man, but because she was a woman, having the same set of skills, being inspired by the muses in the same way in which Dubart was inspired, right? But because she was a woman, she was not given the opportunity, or she was not considered appropriate to become a writer. So she raises this question in a sarcastic way. She says, why did they give me the same set of, skills? I look at the lines written by Dubarthes and I feel that I am capable enough to write similar lines. But I will not be able to write or I will not be able to, write something that will be acknowledged by the society. Dubarthes will be acknowledged by the society because he is a man poet. But because I am a woman poet, I will not be able to get that, acknowledgement. So why did the muses give me the same powers? Here she does not say this literally. What she says is that I was given the same set of skills. So why should there be a distinction between a man poet and a woman poet? This is what she actually implies here, right? So she says, I do grudge the muses did not part twixt him and me that ever fluent store. The ever fluent store, the same skills used for poetry. Now the muses gave him the skills and gave the same skills to me. Why did they do that? Because I'm a woman. I will have no use of these skills in this particular society or in this particular world. So why did they give me? This is the literal thing that she says. And what she actually means is this. If they have given me the skills, that means I am also capable of writing as well as the man poet. A Barthes can do, or Barthes can do what a Barthes will, but simple I, according to my skill. So when we both have the same skills, he writes something, he becomes a great poet. But I become too simple because I'm a woman. I may be writing the same thing. I may be writing in the same manner, using the same set of skills of a poet. The muses have given the same set of skills to both me and to Barthes. And he is writing, I am also writing. I am writing in the same manner in which he is writing. But because he is a man, he becomes a great poet. But I, being a woman, I am too simple. I don't have the capacity or the capability of raising myself to be a poet. That is what she questions. This is the question that she raises. Why can't two poets be treated similarly, irrespective of their genders? Why does a man always become great and a woman always become simple, when they can do the same things in the same fashion, achieving the same goals, achieving the same heights of artistry, right? So that is what she questions here. Then she goes on to say, from schoolboys' tongue no rhetoric we expect, nor yet a sweet consort from broken strings, nor perfect beauty wears main defect. My foolish, broken, blemished muse so sings. And this to mend, alas, no art is able, 'cause nature made it so irreparable. So the next stanza, she justifies the ways in which society evades from, or it's sort of society finds justification in not providing any acknowledgement to women who involve themselves in artistry. A woman who tries to be an artist, how the society, or why the society sort of does not want to provide any kind of acknowledgement or raise the woman to that particular distinction or distinct position that it gives to the man artist. How she points out that a woman when she involves herself or indulges herself in artistry, there are certain ways in which the society restricts her. And then she, in this particular stanza, she says the justifications that are provided for those restrictions. The society restricts the women and then provides justifications, why a woman should not be considered to be an artist. Now this is the stanza in which she refers to those justifications. She points out that the society in these ways justifies the repression of woman artists. She says that the society says that schoolboy's tongue no rhetoric we expect. A schoolboy, a small boy, a young child is not supposed to, talk about rhetoric, or a schoolboy is not expected to use very high-flown language used by adults. A schoolboy is not expected to speak in the language of adults. It is only after that schoolboy has received enough education and is well trained enough, it is only then that he is able to use adult or rhetoric language, complicated language, decorative language, ornamental language. You cannot expect somebody who has just entered school, to speak in a fashion in which adults do, right? So, like in the way society does not expect a schoolboy to, speak in rhetorical language, like in the way sweet music is not expected out of a broken instrument. Now, when an instrument, a musical instrument, is broken, it does not produce the music which it is expected to, right? So, when an instrument is broken, it does not produce music; it produces a harsh sound, right? So, when when a woman sort of indulges in artistry, it is equated to the music of a broken instrument. The comparison is this, that the kind of sound, the kind of bad sound that is produced, when a broken instrument is played, when a woman writes or woman tries to become an artist, okay, it is the same broken art that comes out of a woman, because a woman is not designed for art. That is what the poet is saying, that the society says. The society says that women are not designed for art. Women are not designed for art, just like, the way in which a broken instrument is not designed for proper music, sweet music. Just like when an instrument is broken, it does not produce sweet sound. In the same fashion, when women produce art, that also is not proper. It is not the expected form of art. It is broken art. It is inferior art because it is created by a woman. So, woman is considered. A woman is compared to a broken instrument, a schoolboy who has no training in rhetoric. So, the things that are not expected of certain things when they produce those things, they are bad or they are inappropriate. Similarly, women producing art is inappropriate. If you understand what I'm saying, a schoolboy is not expected to speak rhetorical language. A broken instrument is not expected to produce sweet music. Similarly, a woman is not expected to produce art. No, nor perfect beauty wears main defect. So when there is a defect in anything, right, in anything, if there is a defect, you cannot call that thing perfect beauty. Say for example, you have a vase at home, a flower vase. It's a very good looking vase, it's very beautiful, but the problem is that there is a crack in that vase. So you cannot say that this is a perfect vase or it is an example of perfect beauty. So no matter how beautiful a woman is or how well she writes, she cannot, according to the society, she cannot have the full capacity or full capabilities of becoming an artist. So no matter how well you write, if you are a woman, you are like that cracked vase. You are not a perfect artist. You cannot become a perfect artist just because you are a woman. And a woman is not supposed to be an artist. Right? So you are a vase with a crack. You are not perfect beauty. Who is perfect beauty? Who is that uncracked vase? A man artist. An artist who is a man. So, my foolish, broken, blemished muse so sings. So, the fact that my muse has given me these powers of becoming a poet, she says, and Bradstreet says that I have been given poetic skills, but problem is I'm a woman. So my muse must have been foolish, she must have been foolish. She must have been broken. She herself must have been broken, my muse. She herself must have been foolish. She must have been blemished, imperfect. So she herself must have been imperfect to have given me these skills. She must have been a foolish woman. Because she's not supposed to give the skills to me. She's supposed to give the skills only to a man artist. Only to a poet who is a man. The fact that she's given me these skills, she herself must have been flawed. She must have been imperfect. She must have been blemished, broken and foolish. And this to mend, alas, no art is able. The fact that I have been given the skill. Now what to do about it? Now I have been given the skill. What to do about it? I will write, but the problem is, this cannot be mended. This problem cannot be solved. I can never write like a man, as said by society. Okay, fine, you can write poems, fine, but you can never write like a man. A man will always be superior to you. Because you are a woman, no matter how hard you try, no matter how well you write, or no matter how well you think you write, you will never be able to match up to a man. So the problem of writing like a woman will never be solved. Because you are a woman, you have been born as a woman and you have the skills, this problem cannot be solved. Had you been born as a man, it would have been fine. You being a poet, a writer, it would have been perfectly fine. But because you are a woman, there is nothing you can do that will raise you to the position of a male artist. Now there is nothing you can do. You cannot solve this problem. Because nature made it so irreparable. The society tells a woman artist this. Because nature made it so irreparable. Because nature made you inferior. This is what tradition is telling a woman artist. This is what tradition is telling Anne Bradstreet, and this is the question she raises. Tradition is telling her that because you are a woman, nature has made you inferior. What can you do about it? Your muse has given you the skills of becoming a poet, but you don't have the capacity or the capability to handle those skills because nature has made you inferior. You're naturally inferior. So no matter what you do, how much you write, how beautifully you write, you will never be able to match up to a man's skills. And all this she's saying with a lot of sarcasm in it. what she actually implies is this, that if I possess the same possess the same set of skills as a man, why can't I be considered to be as superior a poet as a man? This is the question. So underlying all these, sarcastic lines are questions. And there is a singular dominant question in this poem. The singular dominant question being that I, being a woman, having the same set of skills as a man, why can't I achieve the heights of, of a male poet or a male artist? Why can't I be acknowledged to possess the same set of skills or the same, capacity, the capability to write as a man? Next she says that, nor can I, like that fluent, sweet-tongued Greek, who list at first in future times speak plain. By art he gladly found what he did seek, a full requital of his striving pain. Art can do much, but his maxims most sure. A weak or wounded brain admits no cure. Okay, so in this particular stanza, Bradstreet, she refers to the great Greek orator Demosthenes. Now, Demosthenes had a lisping problem. I mean, he was an orator, right? He was a public speaker, but he had a problem with lisping. I mean, he used to stop. His speech was not fluent. While speaking, he used to stop a number of times. That was a defect in his brain. Okay, but he overcame that defect through practice, through hard work, and gained the heights of popularity in terms of an orator, a speech maker, somebody who speaks in public, a public speaker, right? So he gained the heights of popularity of being an orator, somebody who had a lisping problem, somebody who couldn't speak proper sentences during childhood, overcame that. And basically, a lisping problem is basically a problem in your brain. There are, nerves which are connected to all your body parts and all your organs. And when there is a defect in a particular nerve, a certain, problem arises. So, the fact that he used to stop during his speech was a problem in his brain. So, she refers to that as wounded brain, right? So, she says that he overcame that lisping problem. That lisping problem means he used to stop during his sentences, means his sentences were restricted. So he overcame his restriction through practice, through hard work, and he was able to overcome that defect in himself. Okay, so she refers to Demosthenes and she says, nor can I, like the fluent, sweet-tongued Greek who lisped at first, in future times speak plain. So she compares herself to Demosthenes and she says that, Demosthenes was able to overcome his defect, but, she would not be able to do that because it was not a defect in her brain that she had to overcome. It was a defect in the society. And it was only when the society, when changes were brought about in the society that she would be able to, overcome the defect of this problem that she was facing as an artist, right? So she says that, nor can I, like the fluent, sweet-tongued Greek who list at first and future time speak plain. So at first, Demosthenes initially during his life used to lisp, but later on he was able to speak fluently. Speak plain means speak fluently. She's saying that I can't even do that, right? By art he gladly found what he did seek. So he found his art, he found a way to overcome this defect, and by using that way, by walking on that path, he was able to overcome that defect by using art. But she's saying that because I'm a woman, I will not be able to do that also. So she says that by using art, Demosthenes was able to, find a solution to his problem. But in case of her, she says that by using art, Demosthenes was able to overcome the problems of his speech. But because she's a woman, she could not even use art to overcome the problems of society. the problem that she was facing as a woman artist, the problem that she was thought incapable of being able to produce superior quality art, that problem she could not overcome using her art. Because no matter how well she wrote, no matter what she did, no matter how superior quality art she produced, she would never be able to gain the acknowledgement of the society because she was a woman. The society would never consider her art or take it seriously because she was a woman. So the restriction that Demosthenes faced, she also faced a restriction, but Demosthenes could use his art, could use his skills, oratory skills, the skills of speech, he could use them, but she could not use that to overcome the societal problems because she was a woman artist. By art he gladly found what he did seek, a full requital of his striving pain. So the pain that Demosthenes faced, he was able to overcome that pain using art. But she could not do that because the pain did not find a solution. The pain could not be removed until and unless she was accepted as an artist. That is the question. Until and unless she was accepted as an artist, her problem would not be solved. She could not overcome her pain like Demosthenes did. Art can do much. She believes that art is capable of doing a lot of things. Art is capable of solving a lot of problems. But this maxim's most sure maxim, truth, reality, this maxim, this rule is most sure. This is a very, very deeply entrenched, a very, very strictly believed law or strictly believed rule that women can't be artists. She's saying that this rule is very deeply entrenched in society. It's very staunchly, strictly believed in society. So no matter what I do, no matter how well I write, I will never be able to overcome this hurdle of it being an acknowledged artist. A weak or wounded brain admits no cure. So it is said that women have inferior brains, weak brains, wounded brains. So they are incapacitated or incapable of producing art. This line is so deeply rooted in society that, and Bradstreet says that no matter what I do, I will hardly be able to change this rule in society because I'm a woman. I will never be able to gain the same popularity or the same acknowledgement that a male poet does. Demosthenes, he was able to do it through his art because he was a man. But because I'm a woman, no matter what I do, I don't even lisp. I don't even have a problem writing. I'm a very well gifted poet. But because I'm a woman, that becomes my flaw. So the lisping of Demosthenes is compared to this poet and Bradstreet being a woman poet. So lisping and being a woman are equated here. Equated in terms of being weaknesses. But because lisping, this problem was with a man, he was able to overcome it. But being a woman, you can't first of all change that, and second of all, this problem cannot be solved in terms of the society because the society does not consider women as artists. Then she says, I am obnoxious to each carping tongue who says my hand a needle better fits. So she says that she detests, she hates those tongues, those mouths, those people who say that her hand is more capable of fitting a needle in her fingers. A poet's pen, all scorn, I should thus wrong, for such despite they cast on female wits. So she says that, very plainly says that she detests, she rejects, she despises, she hates those tongues or those mouths or those people who say that women, they are only capable of fitting a needle in their fingers and not a poet's pen. Because these are people who underestimate the capability of women artists, the capability of women in general. She hates such people. She detests them. She rejects them. She says that I do not consider them as part of, civilized society who believe that women are inferior, that women are only capable of using a needle and not a pen. She uses very strong language here. If what I do prove well, it won't advance. They'll say it's stolen, or else it was by chance. Now, these are very two important lines. She says that if by chance, not by chance, if she produces something which is superior, right? If she produces something superior, no matter how superior form of art she is able to produce, people will say, oh, you must have stolen it from some male poet. Because women are not capable of writing well. How could you have written so well? You couldn't have written so well. You must have stolen it from some male author or male poet. Or, if you have not stolen it, it must have happened by accident, by chance. So no matter how well I write, I will never be acknowledged. I will be told that, my art is stolen from somebody, or it had happened by accident. Then she returns to the Greeks again. She says, by sure, the antique Greeks were far more mild. Else of our sex, why feigned they those 9, and poesy made Calliope's own child? She says that the Greek poets, or the Greek society rather, the Greek society must have had a more milder, a milder attitude towards female artists or women in general. They must have been milder towards women in general. Why? Because otherwise, how could they have made, Calliope a poet's muse? Now, Calliope is a woman; she's a goddess. So, how could she have inspired male poets, being a woman herself? That means, in the Greek society, women must have had a better position. And the Greeks, they are basically the founders of civilization. It is considered that the Greeks are the founders of Western civilization. So, the founders of Western civilization, they must have been wrong. They must have been wrong to have designated women as muses, because those were the muses who were basically inspiring artists who were male, right? They were basically, so women goddesses were basically inspiring male artists. So how was that possible? How did the Greeks make such a big mistake? It must not have been a big mistake. It must have been the fact that the Greeks might have had a milder approach or attitude towards women, right? So how could they make Calliope the goddess or the muse of, poetry? It could have been only possible had, if the Greeks had acknowledged the role of women in the production of art. So the Greek must have acknowledged or given that acknowledgement to women in terms of art. So the Greeks must have been, milder towards towards women in general. So amongst the rest, they place the arts divine, but this weak knot they will full soon untie. The Greeks did not, but play the fools and lie. So either the Greeks were fools, or they were liars, or they had plans of changing these muses ever so often. Because how else could they have made the mistake of making women muses, making goddesses muses? Because they were muses who were supposed to inspire men. How could women inspire men? So it must have been either a mistake on their part, or they did it intentionally to just play with women's position in society, or they must have been fools, or they must have been liars. So either of these possibilities had to be the reason behind the Greeks, making women muses. Now this she is saying literally. The actual implication is that Greeks are no fools and they are no liars. They are the founders of Western civilization. So how could the founders of Western civilization be so foolish? Of course, they were not foolish. They must have had very strong reasons to make women muses, make goddesses muses. So they must have thought that women were capable of doing or achieving certain heights in art. So they must have thought in that fashion. That is the reason that muses were all goddesses. There was no one single god amongst those muses. Every single muse was a woman or a goddess. So there must have been a very strong reason behind this, behind the Greeks doing what they did. And they were not fools, they were not liars. So the Greeks must have given a better position to women in their ancient civilization. And she compares that ancient civilization to her civilization or her age, where women were not considered appropriate to become artists. So you understand the comparison that she's doing. She's comparing the ancient Greek civilization to the present, the one in which she was residing, to the present age. And she's saying that the Greeks who were ancient had given a better position to women than the present age. So who are the fools? The founders of the civilization or the present civilization? So she's asking you this question, or the reader this question. So where does the society stand? The society is flawed. The society thinks in a flawed manner. The wound is not in the mind or the brain of the woman. The wound is in the society itself. The flaw, the fault, the defect is in the society itself. Because the society is not acting as it should be. It should be able to give women the same position as men, but then it is not doing it. It was done by the Greeks in the past, in the ancient past. So ancient past, when the society was not so evolved, there women were given, equal status, or in fact superior status than men. So how come that a modern society was refusing to give the same, position to women? So she is asking this question. Decide for yourself. Who is more foolish, the Greeks or we? Then she says, let Greeks be Greeks and women what they are. Men have precedency and still excel. It is but vain unjustly to wage war. Now then she says something very significant. Now this is her brand of feminism, right? Today's brand of feminism mostly talks about equal opportunities for men and women. She goes on a similar line, but then she says that there need not be any competition between men and women in terms of art. Let men write about what they feel or how they see the world, and let women write in the way in how they interpret the world. There need not be any competition. Let both male art and female art exist simultaneously as art. Let art, be it be pursued by men or women. Let the art of women and men exist simultaneously. There need not be any competition between the two. There need not be the question of superiority or inferiority. We do not need to question whose art is superior or whose art is inferior. Let there not be any competition. Let both of them exist simultaneously. So she's asking for equal acknowledgement of both male and female artists. She's not saying that men write or whatever the men produce that is inferior to women's writings or women's art. She's not saying that. She's saying that, both men and women having the same set of skills of being an artist, let them both coexist, exist simultaneously, right? So she says, let Greeks be Greeks, let them do whatever they have done, and women what they are. Men have precedency and still excel, but it is vain, unjustly to wage war. So there is no point fighting over who is superior or who is inferior, because nobody is superior and nobody is inferior. If you have the skills of a poet, or becoming a good poet, you will become a good poet. You will write good quality stuff. You will produce good quality art. Be it a man or a woman, whoever it is, the person having the skills of a poet will produce good art. Okay, so it is unjust and it is in vain, it is unjustified to wage a war against this. It is unjustified to wage a war against women. It is unjustified to give them no acknowledgement of their brand of art. Men can do best, and women know it well. So she says that yes, men can do best in various fields, and women, we know that. Okay, that men, this is her brand of feminism. She says that okay, men excel in certain areas, that's fine. Men excel in certain areas. Okay, let them handle those areas. Preeminence in all and each is yours, yet grant some small acknowledgement of ours. Now, this is the most important line in this entire poem. Yet grant some small acknowledgement of ours. We, as women, we are aware of the fact that there are certain areas in society in which men are superior or men excel more than women. Right? Because they were given the opportunity to do that. So let them excel in that. Fine. I don't have any problem with that. But give us some small acknowledgement for our role, for the role we play in society as well. Acknowledge the fact that women also have certain skills, that women also have the capability of excelling in those areas, because we also have the same education, the same qualification, the same capability of interpretation as men. So if men are doing well in certain areas, it does not mean that women will not be able to excel in those areas. Let men excel. She's not asking the society to throw out all men from all the public domain, activities and only insert women in those. She is just asking them to give them acknowledgement, to give women acknowledgement of the fact that they are also capable of holding those positions. Say, for example, if there is a school and there is a principal, right? So, and if it is said that no, only a man can become a principal, right? She says that okay, fine, let him become the principal, but acknowledge the fact that we women also have the same qualifications, the same education, the same capabilities of becoming the principal. Give us that acknowledgement. So if you are considering that a man is capable of becoming an artist, acknowledge the fact that a woman is also capable of becoming an artist. You cannot restrict a woman just because she is a woman. You have to acknowledge that a woman can also achieve the same heights of art or artistry as a man. Give us some small acknowledgement. This is her brand of feminism. And then finally she says, and oh ye high-flown quills that soar the skies, and ever with your praise still catch your praise. If ever you deem these lowly lines your eyes, give thyme or parsley wreath, I ask no base. So she is basically referring to all the future readers of this poem. She's referring to you, she's referring to me, she's referring to everyone. She's referring to the future generations. She's saying that if you find that what I have written so far can be considered as art, give me some acknowledgement. Give me, a wreath, a crown of, parsley and thyme. Parsley and thyme are, things that are used, or herbs that are used in the kitchen. I'm not asking for bay leaves, which are, which are used to decorate crowns of all Olympians. Wreaths are basically crowns. If you watch Olympic Games, watch the Olympic Games, you'll see that the winners are given these little crowns, which are made up of certain bay leaves and these and that. So she's saying that I don't need a very decorated crown. I will make do, or I will be satisfied with a parsley or a thyme or any kind of herb, crown. It's okay. But at least I will have the satisfaction of the fact that you have at least acknowledged me. So give me some acknowledgement. I don't need the full-blown acknowledgement that is given to a male poet. I don't expect that. But if you think in any way that my art or my poem, has reached some of your hearts, acknowledge that. Please give me that acknowledgement. Okay, please consider me also to be an artist. She is basically pleading to the readers because being a part of the society, they are the ones who will be able to give her that position. So she is basically pleading to especially the future readers that if you think that I have produced something which can be considered as art, please give me that acknowledgement. I will be satisfied with a little acknowledgement. I don't want the acknowledgement that is showered upon male artists. I don't need that. I just need to be acknowledged a little. Okay. This mean and unrefined ore of mine will make your glistering gold, but more to shine. Yeah, so this mean and unrefined ore of mine will make your glistering gold, but more to shine. She says, what she says is very significant here. She says that if you don't want to give me central position, give my art central position, that's fine. But what my art will do is, it will make your art, she's referring to male artists, she says that it will make your art, to shine more. It will, only add to the betterment of art in general. She says that whatever I have produced, whatever I have written, it is only going to contribute to the betterment of art. If you give me a little acknowledgement, if you consider that my art is, even if it is not as superior as yours, but at least it will be able to give some kind of position to art per se. So she says that this mean and unrefined ore of mine, ore as in the way in which, precious metals come out of the earth. Gold doesn't come out as gold from the earth. It comes out as an ore. I'm sure you've all studied that in geography and chemistry. So when gold comes out of the earth, it is unrefined, it is unpolished, it comes with a lot of other mixtures. So she considers, or she compares her art to that ore. She says that if you acknowledge my art, I will compare my art to that ore, which is unrefined, which is mean, right? Which is mean, which is unrefined, but it will only contribute, or it will only be, it will only progress to become gold in future. When gold comes out as an ore from the earth, then it is polished, it is cleaned, and it only becomes gold. The only way that this ore can transform is by becoming gold, right? So the only natural progression of that ore is becoming gold. So basically what she's saying is this, that despite the fact that you consider my art to be unrefined, to be mean, to be inferior, but if you give me some acknowledgement of my art, what it will do is, it will only make your gold or golden lines shine brighter. It will only add to the betterment of art in general. It will only add to the art of men, of male artists. And when both are both will be considered together, the art of male artists and art of female artists, her poems, when they will be compared, and if she is given acknowledgement that what she has written is actually art, then it will only increase the size of the artistic body. Understood? So if she's writing this poem, and if she is acknowledged, if this poem is acknowledged, it will only be added to the body of poems that is written in this particular language. And if it is considered to be art, then it will only better, or it will make English poetry only better, English art only better. She says that, allow me that position, give me that position, give me that acknowledgement, then it will only be better. Just like an ore only becomes gold, so similarly a small body of art with the addition of my poems will become a brighter body, or a bigger body of art. But if you give me that acknowledgement, so for the sake of art, for the sake of the betterment of art, do give me my due acknowledgement. I do not need high flown appreciation. I do not need bay leaves. I do not need a crown. But just acknowledge me as an artist. I am not competing with any male artist. I am not saying that I am better than any male artist. I am just saying that my art will complement the art of male writers. So my job as an artist is to complement the art that is purely male centric. I am not here to destroy or sort of replace the art produced by men. I'm here to only add to that. Right. So this is basically what Anne Bradstreet is trying to say in this particular poem. She first of all raises certain questions. She raises the question that why can't women be acknowledged as artists? She gives examples from ancient history. She speaks of Demosthenes, and she says that when he used to lisp, he used to have this flaw, yet he could establish himself as an artist, as an orator. But because she is a woman, she is not given that chance. So she is asking for that chance. She first raises these questions and then provides a solution to these questions. She raises the question, that why can't women be treated as equal to men in terms of art? And then she says that if women are treated, equal to male artists, then art in general will, have a better future. If only men are given the chance to write, if only men are given the chance to become poets or writers, art will be restricted. Art will be one dimensional. It will be from only one singular perspective. But if women are given that position, women are acknowledged as artists, it will give a variety to art. It will give a better depth to art because it will provide a different perspective. Say a poem is written from the male perspective, it will have only one perspective. But if a particular area is dealt with by women, it will give a different perspective. So one particular theme will have various perspectives. So it will only increase the quality of art. It will only increase the depth of art, of that particular piece of art in general. So that is what she is saying. In order to make art better, women need to be acknowledged as artists. Okay, so this is basically what Anne Bradstreet is trying to point out in this poem. Now I would ask you to go through the poem once again, underline the sections that you find difficult or you're not being able to understand. You go through this lecture as many times as you want. Even after that, if you face any trouble understanding anything, just underline those portions. After I have completed a certain number of lectures on this particular paper, I will hold a virtual class and then we can discuss those issues there. Or if you want, you can also send in your questions through WhatsApp or in any form, and or you can just call me and just we will resolve all the questions that you have. Apart from this, I will also be sending you certain handouts a little later, not at this point, and let me just complete a little part of your syllabus and then I'll send in the handouts. I'll send you handouts and we'll also discuss possible questions in this particular regard. And even so, if you have any trouble understanding or if you have any sort of question, you can just mail in your questions or WhatsApp me or just call me at any time, right? Okay.